Welcome to An Hour to Give. I'm Sam Laprade. This week we're talking all about Kelly Funeral Home and the really important topic of grief. And I'm introducing my good friend John Laframboise, who's the Director of Community Relations at Kelly's. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Sam. My pleasure.
John, is there an event I don't see you at? Because you're everywhere.
We have been a lot of places together. Our paths cross routinely.
And why is it important, do you think, John? I mean, I'm gonna absolutely stun viewers and listeners right now when I tell them that you have been working for Kelly's for 52, going on 53 years.
That's right.
But why do you think it's so important to be so involved in the community in this line of work?
Well, I think people rely on myself and my colleagues to be there when they need us at a special time. And we all receive calls from friends at home with not great news, and we respond. So continuing working is really just being available and helpful to people that I've come to know along the way and over the years.
Today's show is so important. We have so much to talk about. I want to start with the topic of grief.
Right.
And you and I have had conversations over the years, and we had one very special conversation last year, which made me realize that as friends, even just normal friend groups, the word grief is always sort of a bit taboo still. Mm-hmm. And when you and I had a conversation, it didn't feel taboo at all. Mm-hmm. That's where we're trying to go, right?
Exactly. A few years ago during the pandemic, families didn't have an opportunity to carry out what would typically have been important for them in saying goodbye. And that really compounded the normal course of grief for people. Caregivers in Challenging Times is a booklet that was written by Dr. Bill for us that we could at least get out to the caregivers, the nursing staff, the caregiving staff, and to help them realize that what they were experiencing was kind of normal and okay, and that it was okay for them to talk about it. In general, though, for people who are grieving, it's a lonely experience, and they really sometimes just don't know where to turn. Even for those who have resources or insurance to cover professional help, there just aren't enough people doing this work. So for over 15 years, Arbor Memorial's been working with Dr. Bill Webster in various ways and training programs, and it was time to really respond and react to the needs of the community, not just Ottawa, but across the country. So last year, took us about a year, and I served on the committee that was helping create the program, and we developed the Arbor Care Community Grief Support Program. So in Ottawa, we've been running some groups as one pilot location. There are 5 communities across the country who are piloting the program, and it's a series of 6 weeks, 90-minute sessions. Group size is ideally around 18 people, and this gives people really an understanding of their grief. And Dr. Bill Webster has recorded a series of videos that take you through various stages. And then after a few months, there's a second series that really is about moving forward into the future. So now you've kind of understanding what you're feeling and the normalness of that. And Dr. Bill would say, we don't recover from grief, but we reorganize. And there's some of the very simple things that he says in the program just makes it so comforting, and people have a chance to share in the group sessions. They have a chance to share their story, they don't have to speak if they don't want to. They can just be there, and it's, you know, a very safe, non-judgmental space. And we are now moving out into the community to train facilitators from churches, service clubs, it may be a retirement home.
Right.
We were asked once to take our program into a retirement home where there were 6 people who had lost their partners, and you know, they were not mobile enough to get out, but they still had feelings, and it was a great resource. So we look forward to training facilitators from the community, and in fact 2 days ago we completed the first session of a 2-day program, which continues into the next week. And Dr. Bill is in town, and you'll meet him in a few minutes,
I
Sam.
can't wait. Yeah.
And he just has so much to share about the program. So this program will be across the country in phases over the next year. And we're so pleased because access is just not there. And we're finding that some of the community groups that are offering bereavement support have actually registered and taking our training, because it will simplify their process. They can facilitate, but the content is really in the video from an expert who has an amazing story.
Which is brilliant.
Yeah.
And you know, we mentioned earlier that you know, grief can be a difficult subject. You were a very young man when you got into this line of work. When you take yourself back to that first call, that first opportunity to work with a family, how have things changed, John, over the years?
Well, I think I've grown just through my experience, and you know, every experience was adding to my toolkit, if you will, and helping me develop my confidence. I was very fortunate that I was under Lorne Kelly's wing, and he was an exemplary mentor, and you know, we worked very long days back in the day. I still work perhaps a longer day than sometimes I'd like to, but it's meaningful work, it's helpful work. The folks we serve are always grateful, and you know, in general, people don't know what they need until they need it. And being able to turn to our organization for advice and comfort and coordination. You know, the grief support program, the Arbor Care Community Grief Support Program, is just an extension of our regular Arbor Care program, where we help families with sort of kickstarting, organizing them for their estate settlement journey. And these are all journeys, and they can be very frustrating, but with good advice and patience, it all works out in the end for folks.
Really looking forward to the conversation as well with Dr. Bill Webster, of course, about grief. And you know, when I think about my own journey, I lost my father in 2016, and every book I looked at had these perfect little steps, you know, of all the stages of grief. And I said to somebody one day, my grief was more like a Jackson Pollock painting. It was all over the place. There was no perfect step. One day I didn't say, well, today I'm denying, or, you know, I mean, just, it's not the way it happens. So I think it's really important to bring this out from the shadows and have this conversation. And did I ever think publicly I'd be talking about my dad passing and the grief? No. But I think the more we do it, the more we can support each other as well.
The treasured memories. You know, I work in the garden a lot, and sometimes I get the axe out to chop a root that's in the way, and I strike a stone and there's a little spark, and I hear my dad's voice saying, "That's no way to treat an axe." And you know, we always travel with those important memories, and sometimes they're not great, but we can make them great. Yeah.
And this kind of program in this community, are Ottawa residents ready for something like this, do you think?
Oh, I think so. Access has been difficult. There are some great programs around. Bereaved Families of Ottawa have great programming, but there are limits to how much they can do as well. The wonderful thing about the Arbor Care Community Grief Support Program is that it's offered at no charge to our participants. The facilitators are trained. They will offer it in their communities at no charge. And we are prepared to help them promote the session that they're going to offer. And we'll help them with communications, and we have some templates to do that. And you know, if they need equipment, we have equipment that's portable to take out to a location to help them make it so. Anything we can do to help.
What would you say to a young John Laframboise 53 years ago?
Well, I was determined as a young man to become a funeral director, and I think it's a very worthy, practical career. And you know, it's come a long way in terms of education and communication, and the experts that train at Humber College and Collège Boreal in Sudbury. We are attracting some very strong candidates for the future, and our interns are in the right place at the right time to really be mentored in a very significant way.
It's so important, such an important role in our community, and I'll say I think sometimes we take you all for granted, so I want to stop doing that today.
Oh, we take skin thickening pills.
Yeah, there you go, absolutely. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk about grief today, talk about this important program with Arbor Care as well. I think it's a really key opportunity to spend some time with Dr. Webster, and of course yourself. You're going to come back, right?
I will come back. I'm going to see you and talk a little bit about the Arbor Memorial Foundation.
I look forward to it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sam.
John Laframboise joining us, and John Laframboise will be back with us. As we heard, today's all about Kelly Funeral Home and grief, and I know so many of us are grieving. Lots of loss in our community, and I'm hoping that we can share some of those tips and those opportunities for you to get involved with this program. Stay with us on An Hour to Give. And we're back on An Hour to Give. I'm Sam Laprade, and today is all about Kelly Funeral Home. We're going to talk a lot about grief, and you might be a little bit nervous to talk about grief, but I think we're going to fix all that because Dr. Bill Webster is joining us. Hello, Dr. Webster. How are you?
Hello, Sam. Thank you very much for inviting me.
They affectionately call you Dr. Bill, right?
Absolutely.
That's good. Thank you so much for being here. We spoke with John Laframboise from Kelly. Today is all about Kelly Funeral Homes and this wonderful program they have through Arbor Care. And we started our conversation talking a little bit about grief, and I was really sharing how taboo that is. I think, you know, when I think back to even when I was a kid, if somebody passed away at the funeral home, it was stiff upper lip and there was not a lot of crying, and you did your crying in private and you did your grieving, and then you sort of moved on with your life after the week. You couldn't sort of show anybody that you were still grieving. Those times have changed. Please tell me they have.
In many ways they have, but maybe not as much as we're hoping will happen. You used the word taboo, and I think that's a great word. A taboo is a secret that everybody knows, but nobody talks about. And I think part of the difficulty is that with grief, with death, with loss, nobody talks about it. Because people don't fake grief, they fake being okay. And so I think it's very important that we talk about it. And that's really what our groups are all about, is just giving people the opportunity to come together, to be in an accepting community where nobody knows how anybody else feels, but at least we have something in common. We've had a significant loss, and to be able to talk about it. Because as Mr. Rogers once famously said, Fred Rogers, of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood,
Yes.
Anything that is mentionable is manageable.
Wow.
And I think there's a lot of truth in that.
There's a lot of truth in that. You've already sparked so much in me in terms of our discussion today. Take me back. Give me a sense of, if you were to introduce yourself to someone on an elevator, what would you say?
Well, I would tell them that I'm a grief counselor. I got into grief counseling in the mid-'80s. My wife died suddenly and unexpectedly in 1983, leaving me with 2 little boys, single dad, and really not getting a lot of support, as you mentioned, because not that people didn't care, it was just that they didn't know where to go with it. They didn't know where to begin the conversation. And so I felt there wasn't a lot of support. And a couple of years after, I decided I wanted to see if I could do something to help people in my situation. I did my doctorate at the U of T and developed a model of community grief support. And that's really what we've developed over the last 20, 30, oh my goodness, 35 years. I'm aging myself here. But we've developed a model that is now, and I'm delighted that it's being taken right across the country by Arbor and the Arbor Care program. And we're also developing it in the UK, which I'm very pleased about, obviously being from Scotland.
Mm-hmm. I was going to ask you about that accent. I could listen to that all day. It's wonderful to have you here and sharing your experiences. You know, your own, I always find something that really makes a difference in society comes from somebody that's had a personal experience. I mean, there's thousands of examples of that. So your own personal experience, do you think that has, obviously, you know, it's taken you a long time to sort of, you know, engage with a lot of people, but do you think those individual conversations have been different? I don't want to use the word better, but because you've had your own personal experience.
Well, the bottom line, Sam, is this, that grieving people come into a grief support group. It's the last place in the world they really want to be, because who wants to come to a grief support group? Because when you're coming to a support group like that, you're saying, I've had a loss, and we really don't want to go down that road if we can help it, but we know we need help. And so I think grieving people have one question when they come into the groups, and it's not, do you have a doctorate? How many books have you written? All this stuff. It's, do you have any idea what I'm going through? So when I can share my story, then they're able to identify with me. My wife died in the mid-'80s. Just some years ago now, I lost my son in an accident. Oh, no. So here I'd been a grief counselor for 35 years, the expert, and it just knocked the legs right out from under me. And so it's one thing to understand it in theory. It's quite another thing to experience it in your own life. So yeah, I think you mentioned earlier about the stages and the books that you read after your dad died. And I can really identify with that, because there is no one neat, orderly way to go through grief. Every one of us goes through our own process. And it's giving people the opportunity to say, what's the reason behind my reaction? Right. That really is what my work is all about.
I'm so sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
So sorry. What I found, and just picking up on talking about, you know, my experience with my dad, I remember my dad passed away, and he passed away February 2nd on Groundhog Day, which, by the way, he would have found very funny. Had a great, wonderful sense of humor. And then about 6 months later, someone just casually at the end of a meeting on a Friday afternoon said, hey, what are you doing this weekend? And I said, oh, I'm going to my parents' place. And it just hit me like a boulder. And I said, oh, actually, I'm just going to my mom's. Yeah. And I think I grieved more in that moment than I did at the funeral. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. Because again, as I say, there's a reason for every reaction. The difficulty is when my wife died and when my son died, there's that sense of disbelief.
Right.
This can't be happening. This isn't real. And so there's a sense of numbness. And sometimes it's 3 months, 6 months. There's no time frame. But when we're ready, something triggers. And then you think, wow, you know, it suddenly hits you. And that's when the reality, because it takes us a long time to prepare ourselves to face the reality. Kubler-Ross called it denial. It's a good term. But, you know, we don't do it all at once. It comes, and then eventually we go, wow, Dad's not here, or my wife or my son isn't here. And I think but the problem is, we don't understand that. We've never learned it. And so that's really what our program's all about. In the first element of grief support, you're going to be surprised by this, is education. Because if people think that grief is a mental health disorder, or I'm going crazy, or I'm losing it, or even worse, if I'm not living up to people's expectations of how well I should be doing. Because I remember back in 84, someone saying to me, it's been 3 months, you ought to be over it by now. Wow. Well, you don't get over it in 3 months. As John said, you don't get over it, you get through it. And so I think it's very important that people understand that this is a normal reaction. You asked me a question just a little while ago, is this normal? Is this what happens? Yes, it is. And so our program is really, first of all, education, helping people to understand what is normal. Now, we normalize, but we don't minimize, because it's the most difficult thing people ever have to go through. But it's a natural human reaction. And then when people understand that, we move into expression, which is, oh, I'm normal. This is okay. Let me tell you about it. And out it comes. And then that leads to the third element, which is empowerment. And that was John mentioned in our second series, is helping people to say, hey, I've had a loss, but I have to make the most of what I have left.
And, you know, we've all just, I dare to say, come through, because it feels like there's some elements that are still lingering. But I take you back to 2020 with COVID. And, you know, the loss was just, I mean, there's no words. I mean, right. for the grief of, obviously, the loss of lives, the loss of childhoods, the loss of jobs, the loss of finances. I mean, I could go on and on and on. Of course. We couldn't come together as we normally would at Kelly's and celebrate someone's life. How do you think that affected us as a society?
Well, that's a big question, and thank you for asking it. Because I think when we couldn't visit loved ones in hospitals or in nursing homes, when we couldn't have funerals and rituals, people said, well, after this is over, we'll have a celebration of life. 95% of people didn't have anything. Now, I'm a grief counselor, so my concern is for the well-being of people. But when people don't have an opportunity to have a meaningful goodbye, something's unresolved. And what we're seeing in the field of grief counseling and therapy is what's been described as prolonged grief disorder. It's really, you know, that the grief goes on and on and on because people haven't had an opportunity. It's important to have a funeral or a meaningful goodbye, but people are getting away from that. People are opting for instant disposition or whatever. Now, I'm not a funeral director, but I'm concerned that if people don't have an opportunity to say goodbye, it gets prolonged, and then it comes up later on down the road and something triggers, as you mentioned, and then but by that time, of course, all the sympathy's gone and you ought to be over it by now, right. And so on. So I think it's very important because, forgive me, a ritual, what's a ritual? A ritual isn't necessarily a funeral service, doesn't have to be religious. A ritual is something you do when you don't know what to do.
Oh, I'm so glad you said that. We only have about a minute left, but then you're going to come back. We're going to have a deeper chat.
Be delighted.
But I just want to say is that, you know, this program and why I brought up the pandemic is for that very reason. Is there may be someone that lost somebody in 2020, 2021 that is like, we actually didn't have a funeral. We didn't have a celebration of life. How can I work through this? So the Arbor Care Grief Support Program would be a great first place.
And also John has resources that help people. It's never too late to have a meaningful goodbye, to have some kind of a ceremony, whether that's just a get-together or a wake or whether it's releasing healing blood. It doesn't matter. Doing something is what's really important.
Thank you so much,
My
Dr.
pleasure.
Webster. We'll be back in a minute with the one and only Dr. Bill. He's going to come back and speak more about grief. I know I've already learned stuff, and I know that there is way more to learn. Stay with us on An Hour to Give. Today is all about Kelly Funeral Home and, of course, Arbor Care, an important program regarding grief. The one and only Dr. Bill Webster is joining us again. Hello.
Hello.
You're quite famous, I understand.
Oh, come on now.
An author 9 or 10 times over.
Yeah, well.
So that's pretty impressive.
I'm just a guy who likes to help people. And John mentioned it earlier, you know, that's why I do it. I'm passionate about this, you know, and I absolutely love it. It's my privilege. So forget the great Bill Webster.
It's wonderful.
Anyway, that's okay. Thank you very much. It's a great compliment.
Well,
thank you.
Thank you. So talk to me a little. You've got a series of books. If somebody was going to pick up one book from you about grief, where would they start?
Well, we're actually finding that it's easier for us to put books on our website as PDFs. First of all, because it's expensive to print, expensive to mail, and so on. So we have a website at griefjourney.com, and if people wanted to find some of my books, but I also know that Kelly Funeral Home provides some of my books through Arbor, so you could go in and talk to John, and hard copies of the books would be available there. All of my books, I think the niche that I've created is that all of my books are geared towards grieving people. So there's a lot of books out there, wonderful books, academic books, theoretical books, training books, all these things, great stuff. There's not a lot that actually communicates with grieving people, because when grieving people are numb, when they can't concentrate, when they're confused, as often happens right after a death, they can't read 300 pages.
Right.
They can read 48 pages or something similar. When they're not able to concentrate because they may have tears in their eyes or something, so our print is a little larger. And we've developed the market that makes it available to people, often through funeral homes right across the country. And so that I take great pride and pleasure in knowing that we have had many hundreds of thousands of my books go across the country and help people over the years.
Why is the partnership with Arbor Care, with Kelly Funeral Homes, so important to someone like yourself, Bill?
Well, at my stage of life, you know, I'm in my mid-30s.
Why am I laughing?
I don't know. I'm looking to my legacy.
Right.
And John here in Ottawa and Arbor Care across the country are giving me the opportunity to reach more and more people. Arbor has well over 100 funeral homes, and they're going to be offering this in communities right across Canada. We're also in a similar arrangement doing it right across the UK as well. That gives me a great deal of pleasure, because really I see my goal and my purpose is helping as many grieving people as I possibly can. If I may, the nice thing about the Arbor Care program and our program in the UK is that because people like John and Arbor themselves have adopted the program, they are offering it to people at no cost to them.
Right.
So this is a great community effort. They're making it available in communities at no cost. Because while I'm a grief counselor and while some people need professional grief counseling, many people can't afford professional rates. Again, I'm not criticizing that. I'm just saying we want to make it as available as possible to people. And so I was thrilled when Arbor approached me and to be involved with a company like Arbor and people like John to say, yes, I'd be delighted. And my task was to produce the videos, which is the content, and my task now is to train the facilitators who will actually do it. They don't have to make the presentations. That's on the video. But they need to know how to approach people and make them feel comfortable and break through that resistance that people have coming to a grief group, and we've developed a number of ways that they can do that.
It's wonderful because, like you mentioned, a legacy. You're not keeping all this to yourself. You're wanting to share it, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's I was recently given an award in the UK for my work, and that's very nice. That's wonderful. But the real thing is that my work is being validated, and it's really saying, hey, you've done something significant, And at the end of life, which I'm not there yet, don't get John excited, but at the end of life, you look back and really, have I made a difference? It's not how much money have I made, or what are my achievements and all that kind of stuff. That's the egotist that does that. I'll look back and say, I made a difference for people, many of whom I don't even know.
Right.
And I'll never know.
Right.
So to me, that gives me a great deal of satisfaction.
For sure. And I think, all of the different communities, I just think about Ottawa, obviously, but all the different communities that would benefit from that, from, obviously the grief counseling, but the opportunity to participate in this program.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's hard to make it downtown, for instance.
No, that's right. Exactly. and I think the real power in the grief support model, yes, the education, but it's the expression.
Right.
It's getting people to the place where they can talk about it and put it into words. There's an important counseling principle that says that which cannot be put into words cannot be put to rest. And so this conspiracy of silence that you mentioned about taboos and about grief and about loss, we've got to get over that and get through that and come to the place where we can actually talk about it like we can talk about the Maple Leafs losing. May I say that in Ottawa?
Yes.
Of course I can say it in Ottawa.
Of course you can say that here.
But I mean, there's grief, you see. And
100%. And I think one of the most challenging things for me was when I lost my father, my daughter was 8. And so not only dealing with my own grief, but now how do I deal with her grief?
Yeah, that's right.
And help her?
Of course. And I think children and grief is a very real speciality. Children grieve differently from adults.
Right.
And my sons were 9 and 7 when their mom died. And I think it was 10 years later when they suddenly said, tell us about Mom, what was it like and so on. I think grief for a child has to do with safety and security. They want to know if they're going to be okay. And they also want to know if Mom's going to be okay. So sometimes they'll pretend to be strong and pretend to be, the big man, big woman syndrome, it's called, because they don't want to upset you. Because if you're upset, if Mom's upset, then that threatens their world. So it's and there are some wonderful programs for children that can be very, very helpful.
I asked this question, John, as well. How have things changed in the last number of years in this work?
In this work, I think there's a more openness to grief support. I think we're validating it. I think that back when I started, I went to the University of Toronto and said, I want to do my work and my research and my project in grief support. And they said, what? Because it's a relatively new field. Now, of course, everybody's a grief counselor,
right.
which is a different thing. But again, I think that this model that we've developed is good. And I think it's going to make it available to more and more people. And then when they come in, the word of mouth will get out and people will start to say, hey, that's worth it. If I could also say, Sam, I think one of the most important parts of grief support is certainly psychological, certainly emotional, but also social. Because John mentioned the word lonely in his first segment. And I think people are lonely. How do we define loneliness? Loneliness is the sense of isolation that comes from the absence of a needed relationship. And that definition allows us to say, even you can feel lonely in a crowd because I missed my wife. I miss my son. Now, I'm remarried, I have another son, I have grandchildren, I have all kinds of relationships, but I miss that one.
Right.
And that's what loneliness is. So when people come together in a community that understands, that accepts them, that isn't going to judge them, a community of acceptance, a fellowship of sufferings, if you like, then they make bonds. And then they say after the group, well, thank you very much for the group, Bill. We're meeting for lunch on Sunday. We're going out for coffee.
Right.
And in fact, we even organized travel trips for them. And you say, well, that's, what does that have to do with grief support? It's finding a life. It's being able to go on to say, I have a life and I need to make the most of it. And so we have a social program. I have a committee that runs it all. And I'm hoping to develop that across the country as well, to give people the opportunity to say, I got a life and I have to live that life and I can do it among friends. That's what we call our group.
That is brilliant. Brilliant. I find so many, and of course, as I mentioned, I lost my father in 2016. I find over the last number of years, I'm 53, so a lot of people are losing their family. And I feel, someone will post that they've lost their mom, and I go on Facebook and I'll say my condolences and I'll send them a little note. But I feel like I want to do more. What advice would you have for us that is witnessing grief?
Well, I think you bring up the topic of social media, and I think social media is very important, and I contribute to social media and all the rest of it. I think, again, it's communication. So a lot of the social media stuff is personal and so on. We post videos on social media, and that's just another vehicle because it's education, expression, and empowerment. And so I think that I think it's calling people 6 months after,
Right.
a year after, birthdays, anniversaries, Christmas, all of these times when you think, hey, maybe they're struggling right now, or just a Sunday, because that's often a family day. And so to stay in touch, to give people a year of mourning. Now, there is no one neat, orderly time frame for grief. Everybody's different, but sometimes, I think of my dad on Easter Sunday. He died in 1971.
Right.
I think I'd be over it by now. But he was my dad. Now, I don't think of him with sadness and tears. I think of him with a great deal of affection. And I think really the purpose of grief support is to help people, move from memories of the past into new memories. And let me rephrase that. They have to move from memories of the death to memories of the life.
Oh, I love that.
Because, so often in the first few months, all we can think about is the death. The image, we think of the person and up comes that image at the funeral home or whatever. And these aren't the best memories. To remember the life.
Beautifully said.
Right?
Beautifully said. Thank you so much. Appreciate it all.
It's been a pleasure, Sam. Thank you for inviting me.
Dr. Bill Webster joining us today, and I learned a lot. When we come back, John Laframboise, of course, from Kelly Funeral Home, is going to come back and talk about a wonderful foundation that's helping in this community. Stay with us on An Hour to Give. Well, this show is all about good news, and today we've got lots of good news to share about a wonderful foundation in our community. I'd like to invite back the one and only John Laframboise. Hello, John.
Thank you, Sam.
Director of Community Relations at Kelly Funeral Home. We talked about it before. We see each other all the time, all over the place. You're everywhere. Walk me through the foundation. What does it mean when you have a foundation with Kelly Funeral Home?
So our parent company is Arbor Memorial, a family business home office in Toronto with 100 funeral home locations across the country and almost 50 cemeteries and about 45 crematoriums. And in 2011, the Arbor Memorial Foundation was established. And since 2011, this is an employee-driven charity which is managed by Arbor Memorial volunteer employees. And since 2011, $2.1 million have been distributed across the country to worthy charities. In Ottawa, in just the last 3 years, we have distributed $139,000 from the Arbor Memorial Foundation's distribution. That would be in addition to our regular gifting budget, support budget from the Ottawa area, and also our partners at Capital Funeral Home and Cemetery. So we reach out to our employees for information about a charity that they're working with in the community, and I coordinate the applications through to the foundation, and we're hopeful to receive news in the very early weeks of June as to what we can distribute this year in Ottawa.
Wow.
So it's been a joy to be able to support various worthy organizations, and we're in particular seniors organizations, inclusiveness, diversity organizations, the disaster relief, food banks, just the essentials of our community. And when the Kelly Funeral Homes transitioned to Arbor Memorial's ownership, the vice president interviewed me, and at the end of the interview he said, is there anything you would like to add? And I said, well, you know, we have a fairly strong presence in the community in a charitable way and in a community involvement way. And he said, John, if it's important to you, it's important to us. Don't change a thing.
Wow.
So
That's leadership.
we carry on with what I grew up with in the Kelly organization, and it's so great to have the support of the Arbor Memorial Foundation. Last year, and again just recently, we've made significant donations to Pallium Canada, which is a leader in training and educational development best practice in the healthcare sector, especially in the palliative sector.
Right.
And we've helped with contributions to the relocation of the palliative care unit from the downtown Bruyere location to the St. Vincent Pavilion. And we have enjoyed helping make a difference. It's like the grief support program. Well, this is before you need the grief support program, but it just really is helping organizations to do the work and see out their vision and their mission, and also supporting the volunteers. It's often providing something that engages the volunteers and gives them that post-retirement volunteer energy.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, there's so much in there. And we saw each other most recently in November. You attended the Silver Cross Mother Lunch.
Yes, I did.
That was an unbelievable experience. I was so blessed to be there too. Those types of experiences and seeing the way that the funding is used, and that was particularly regarding the National Poster and Literary Contest for the Legion National Foundation. Those opportunities are wonderful ways for you to see firsthand how the funds are being used.
It's very convenient that those events happen in Ottawa,
Yes.
and that I get a phone call from the communicators at our home office to be present. The other aspect of the foundation is that it's really employee driven, and the employees have there's an annual campaign that is supported by the employees and through payroll deduction, and those contributions across the country are matched by the company at the end of the year, and it helps with just that much more funds that we can distribute in so many communities.
Yeah, it's incredible to see the work that's been done. And I know one of the projects that's near and dear to your heart is Hike for Hospice. Talk to me a little bit about that program.
So I've been hiking for hospice for about 18 years.
Wow.
And my first ever hike was with Friends of Hospice. I was a board member at the time, and it was at Andrew Hayden Park. And just a couple of weeks ago, our team was at the Britannia Ron Colbus Center area.
Right.
And we had a great hike along the river, and the flowers were starting to blossom, and a major fundraiser for Hospice Care Ottawa, and we were privileged to be the presenting sponsor. Coming up on, I think it's May 26th, is the Beth Donovan Hospice hike in the Kempville area, and we are presenting sponsors there as well, and have a team raising funds for that local initiative.
Yeah, it's incredible to see how, I think many people may drive by Kelly Funeral Homes and not understand that you don't want to just connect with people on the saddest day.
Mm-hmm.
You want it to be 365 and connecting with people in the
Mm-hmm.
community through the foundation
Mm-hmm.
and through all the other initiatives that you do.
In a few weeks, I'll be taking a drive over to the Shepherds of Good Hope Garden
Yes.
and see how little sprouts are starting to come out of the ground, and we've been supporting that initiative for very many years.
Yeah. And when you think about a foundation, people may not sort of understand that this is an opportunity for you to really take a deep dive into so many different areas. You mentioned shepherds, we've mentioned hospice care, we've mentioned many different sort of areas. Is there an area that is really a focus for you? I mean, I know seniors has been a focus in the past as well.
Well, many of the organizations that we support are not top of mind for people. You know that planned giving is such an important
Right.
Consideration for many. But when folks are starting out, maybe they buy their house, they make their will, hopefully. They're not leaving something to end-of-life organizations. They don't think of these organizations that are so critical to our Ottawa community, and we try and sort through that, filter through that, and make sure that we're assessing their needs and trying to do something specific, and often with the volunteers in mind, and just know that even the smallest donation we can make is creating a huge difference. So it varies from year to year. I was interested this year. I heard the cause at Ronald McDonald House and their expansion, which is really linked to expansions that's happening at CHIO.
Right.
And we just try and consider what can we do this year. We can't always repeat donations through the foundation to the same organization. Sometimes we are fortunate and that happens, but we really, it's all about engaging our staff in the community. Our staff are all, my mother would say, people persons.
Yeah.
And we enjoy being a neighbor, being a friend, being just a normal member of the community, not always seen as the funeral director.
Right. Yeah, such an important point. We talked a lot today with yourself and with Dr. Bill Webster about the Arbor Care Grief Support Program and the journey that many people in our community are on.
Right.
If someone has heard us chatting about that today and they want to maybe consider being a facilitator or participating in the two series approach, how would they reach out to you? How would they get involved?
The simplest way is by email, grief@kellyfh.ca. And our aftercare coordinator and our grief support program coordinator, Margaret Burnside, will give the folks a call and establish the information they need.
You've got such an interesting job in this community, and I remember thinking back just about 3 years ago, and you said, Sam, I've been doing this job for 50 years. And it just seems like this was the job that you were born to have in this community. I can't imagine anyone else doing this job, John.
No, I enjoy it. My dad worked till he was 65, and I thought I should. And when I announced that it was time, I was general manager.
Yes.
And I was asked to please carve out that piece of your job that's community relations. And it was a real gift for me, essentially, on a more casual basis. I work about 3 days a week and spread that over however the week needs it. I was able to do things that I knew I wanted to do but didn't have the time when I was in that day-to-day leadership role. Now I've been able to uncover and find places that needed some attention, or that I was hopeful we could learn more and help with. And the community relations job is actually much larger than it was 4 years ago, and I'm hoping to carry on in some way for a few more years. But
well, we're grateful for that.
We're
I'm so
getting
happy.
there.
And thank you for introducing me to Dr. Bill Webster. I learned so much from him in our time together today about grief and about how we all need to work together and come together. And I think the leadership of Kelly Funeral Home and the leadership of Arbor Memorial to be able to bring all of us together in this way is wonderful. So thank you very much.
Dr. Bill is just a tremendous individual. His life experience is exceptional, and he explains things in such a plain language, comfortable way. It's our pleasure to have him as part of our program.
Well, it was my pleasure to have both of you here today, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam.
John Laframboise is a good friend and also a wonderful Community Relations Director at Kelly Funeral Home. I hope you learned a lot today. I know I did. Lots of resources mentioned during this show, but head to Kelly Funeral Home if you're looking for any of those resources for yourself. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Sam Laprade, and this has been An Hour to Give.